I want to tell the audience that what we're going to discuss today with these leaders, these are key opinion leaders we have at the panel today, is actually of critical importance to the nation and will have direct impact on your generation. It's not going to have as much as an impact on my generation because we're looking at a 10, 20-year horizon, but certainly you who have another 50 years to live in this country will be significantly impacted by the policies that are made today for the country to be self-sustaining. Atma Nirbhar really is the program that the Prime Minister has started, and basically it means self-sustaining. And it's very critical for your generation that we think deeply about this and also act today. You cannot wait till 20 years later to act on this. History has shown clearly that countries that innovate thrive. United States is a great example. And countries that do not innovate barely survive. We have a lot of neighbors around India who are great examples of those that have not innovated. India has actually, Indian biopharma specifically has done brilliantly, I think, in the last 2 years. I'm just going to read some numbers out to you. We have 3 vaccines innovated here. You all know that, Corbevax, the Zydus vaccine, as well as Bharat Biotech. $7 billion in sales has been, $7 billion in sales has been generated through that work. I mean, that is just the financial aspect, but the number of lives that may have been saved through that innovation obviously cannot be measured. When COVID began, we used to have to get PPE suits. All of you are aware of what PPE suits are. India now is the second largest producer of PPE suits. We are generating more than $10 billion in revenue through making PPE suits, sanitizers, and masks, and all of that. Remdesivir, which has become the #1 go-to drug now. India is again one of the largest scale-up manufacturers for Remdesivir. So brilliant work by Indian biopharma scientists, both biologists and chemists. But the key question still is, these are still early days for us. Is this innovation that we have done scalable? And if so, what is the mantra? And if it is not, if you're not doing, then what do we need to do? So today's panel really, as I said, has a critical importance, and I'm very glad to have some very smart people on the panel discussion, all of them who I know very well. Some of them I don't get to meet, even though they're only 20 kilometers away from me. But very, very thankful for all of you to spare your time on a Monday morning at 8:30 and be here. Thank you very much for that. As indicated, the format is going to be, I will go from who I see on my screen first, and that's Vinay. I see Ashwini, then I see Radha and Satakarni. I think Satakarni, you were the last at the last forum as well. I apologize for that, but that's the way I see you on the screen. So, and we have 2 sets of questions that have been communicated to the panel. I will ask the same questions to all of the panelists, and they'll have about 3 to 4 minutes to answer that. Then there is a second round of questions also with the same format. And I think we will have time today to be able for all of you to give like a 1-line statement of an advice to the young people. Most of the audience today is very young people. We're going to have 75 to 100 people at least, mostly young students who have paid and registered for this meeting. So 1-line advice of yours to them would be fantastic. So, and after that, we will reserve time. We'll try and reserve 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A because we have a very aggressive group. They ask a lot of questions in the workshop that I've seen. So look forward to that. And audience, please do ask your questions. You can ask them anything except movies or cricket or astrology. But other than that, science, I think you should feel free to ask them about what your burning questions are. So I will then start the first question with Vinay. Vinay, this is a question that obviously you have probably seen, but the question is, what is the one thing you suggest that Indian biopharma has to do for the nation to be Atma Nirbhar? Does it have to do with, when I say innovation, for example, there is a new Pfizer antiviral drug for COVID-19, right? So that's true innovation, and we still are not there yet. So when I say innovation, I mean in that respect. We are being innovative, but I'm saying out of the box innovation. What do you think is the one thing, Vinay, that we are not doing now? And if we could do that, we would be a successful, innovative biopharma ecosystem in the country.
Thank you, Uday. I agree with most of that you actually started out with. In the last 2-3 years, we've seen significant growth and significant, I wouldn't say innovation, but capacity building, coming to a point where we can produce many of these things in Indian pharma sector. The problem is we still tend to import quite a lot of these components. We are pretty good at putting it together, but not necessarily doing everything here. Can we do it? Actually, I believe that we have the brains, we have the capability, we are not short on talent. Capacity building in terms of producing components, even for a kit, it requires money and importantly, long-term outlook. It is easier to say import few components and put together a kit and make it marketable. Competition is quite stiff. So companies do that in the short term, which is understandable. But when you start talking about innovation or when you start talking about doing it something in the Atma Nirbhar in the country, then we actually have to invest in building various components that are necessary for the final product, whatever it may be. So this is one aspect that I believe that one needs to work on. So it would be very difficult for new pharma companies to work on this kind of an aspect of capacity building and making everything that is needed, or at least making most of the things that are necessary for doing any of this work in India. But for established companies, this should be doable. If they can invest today in going in this direction, going on our own ideas, trying to innovate for newer drugs, we should be able to do. They have the capability, they have now necessary finances, and the last 2 years of growth should now be converted into something more tangible outcome in terms of this innovation. So what is needed? I believe the desire to do. First thing is, do we want to do it? Desire to do this and having that long-term risk appetite and long-term outlook by the companies. This is applicable to multiple biotech, pharma pipelines, which can be diagnostics, drug development, vaccine research program, no matter what. The second thing is building the right kind of team. I think last time also I was mentioning this. You see, if you realistically do not invest in really talented manpower, or manpower, I wouldn't say that, I would say that human resources, we are actually, there is no way we can build things. We can actually building something new from ground up requires talented human resources. Do we have it? We have it. Do we lose them up for going abroad a lot? Yes, we do lose a lot of good quality manpower. How do we retain them? Certainly it requires incentivizing, in the sense like you need to pay higher. You make sure that if you find a talented person, do everything that is there to that you can do to retain them in your workforce. These two things are extremely important from the point of view of going for a new innovation or becoming more and more reliant, self-reliant. The other thing is to have clear visions, provide clear ideas that this is what we want you to do, and here we are leaving you alone to do this, and this is your time frame. And last but not the least is to have extensive internal discussions with teams and even with external experts, so that we are in the right direction and to figure out that we can actually do these things. That's what I personally believe is kind of required.
Yep, very insightful answer, Vinay. Thank you very much for, I have captured desire, rewarding talent, having clear vision, and extensive introspection, I think are the 4 main points you've suggested, and all of them are right on the money. On the desire aspect, I wonder why, because in the United States, the desire, it's a capitalist country, as you know. Innovation there is purely based because they're going to make money out of that. We have the same ecosystem here as well. I'm wondering why the desire, is it the scary, people are scared about the risk and the reward, or why don't we have that desire to do breakthrough moonshot ideas? You're on mute, Vinay.
I think we have the desire most probably, but I think it's a risk appetite. You know, younger people, new companies cannot do this. This is what I'm saying. Established companies, which are like already there, have enough resources to actually attempt this. And that is where, I mean, I expect the leadership to have the desire to go in this direction. And if the leadership is not pushing for it, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's not bottom up. These kind of things are top down. I mean, somebody who has the money has to put where we put the investment for this.
Yep, complete agreement, Vinay. Very well said. I hope we will be able to draft the minutes from this meeting and pass them on to some of those leaderships, just to remind that the key opinion leaders in India think that they need to invest more in innovation. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Ashwini, who's next on my screen. Ashwini, do you want me to repeat the question, or you're okay, or I can repeat it if you want? Yeah.
I'm good. I think we heard the question and it's very relevant. Am I audible?
Yeah, very clear. Thank you. Yeah.
So it's very relevant and topical. And as you just mentioned, the majority of audience is the students. So I will just set the stage since many of them are youngsters and may not have the broad picture at the moment. Firstly, anything that you do in R&D is a long-term exercise. It's a long haul. Nothing comes very quickly when you take on a new research project. The second point to note is that no one team or no one group has all the expertise. So collaborations are very important in R&D. That's the second thing to note. The third is, as just mentioned, and I'm pretty much taking off from what Uday and Vinay said a few minutes ago, because it really sets the stage for today's discussion. And the third is money. We need the money. The money may come from government support in terms of startup grants or from industry stakeholders. Having said these 3 points, I will now spend a few minutes on what kind of problems the biotech, pharma industry could take up to be, self-reliant, to be more vocal in terms of the local infrastructure and products that are coming out. And I will start from what was said, that we are very good at being one of the leaders in the both biopharmaceutical, biologics and pharmaceutical industry. And whenever you are trying to identify where to go, I think one has to identify the gap. And the gap is, while the Indian industry is doing very well in terms of the last mile inputs, the Indian pharmaceutical industry, there is a gap in what we call as KSMs, which is key starting materials. We are still heavily dependent, and there are several videos, a few of which I saw in the last few days. We are still heavily dependent on KSMs. So we import the basic raw materials when it comes to pharmaceuticals. And I think that is where if the biologics and chemistry innovation goes in, we will get what the Americans.
No.
Okay.
That was just, yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So KSMs today are typically made largely using chemistry routes. That is synthetic chemistry routes where we use catalysts. And I will take an example, sitagliptin, which is a blockbuster drug for diabetes. One of the key starting materials is a beta amino acid, and it's a chiral beta amino acids. And as we know, synthetic chemistry is very good at making chiral molecules. But at the same time, the chirality and the complexity in structure that chemistry introduces is at a very heavy cost of catalysts which come from sometimes transition metals, rare metals, whose prices fluctuates across the world. And these processes, while they looked economical 20 years ago, with the competition that has come globally, are no longer competitive to make using chemistry routes. So to cut the story short, if we can find bioequivalent processes, and they are there, using enzymes, using proteases, using synthetic biocatalysts, we get many advantages. The first one is typical chemistry reactions. Take the beta amino transaminase reactions, where you are introducing a chiral amino center in the drug intermediate, has to be done at a very high pressure of almost 200 psi. It uses a rhodium or a transition metal catalyst. On the other hand, there is a biological biocatalyst process which happens at room temperature. The yield is higher, the enantiomeric excess is higher, the conditions are close to ambient. So you are going everything towards a green process, a sustainable process. And that's how the world is doing it globally. But that's where I think the Indian biopharma industry innovation can come in. Having given this example, there are others also. There are acelases, there are transesterases, there are transamidases. There is a biocatalyst, and Dr. Vinay is here, Radha is here, several others are here who can tell us more about what kind of problems to pick. Now, how do we go about doing it? I'll just spend a minute. I think once you take on a problem like this, as I said, it has to be a team. So once you identify the problem, for which one can have a separate discussion, one has to get in touch with universities, national labs, because they have certain facilities which you need. You also need to then tie up with startups, because the kind of energy and drive which a startup can bring in is incomparable to something which is part of a steady state system. So what I would say is a three-pronged recipe. Identify the right problem in terms of KSMs, key starting materials, important intermediates which can have a bioequivalent enzymatic process. Connect with the right stakeholder labs, whether it is the national labs or it is the startups. Have a hybrid model, bring in some inputs in terms of funding from the private sources, from the industry, tie up with BIRAC, and the academic interface also brings in funding from other sources as well. And I think that's where one can fill a gap which will make a long-term contribution to the biopharmaceutical industry in terms of making it more Atma Nirbhar going into the future. I think I have covered both the student aspect as well as the research aspect. The policy, I think I'm not the right man. I will leave it to some of the others to comment on what kind of policies we need to, bring this into high gear, innovation at the national level, domestic level. Thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant insight, Ashwini, especially on the KSM. I think you really hit upon a very, very critical point. One of the things when I talk to people about why we import certain key, like you said, key starting material, why we import, I've often heard the answer, it's cheaper to do it that way rather than make it. How do we solve that problem? Is it simply through putting more?
The answer is already in my last few comments. It's cheaper to import the chiral intermediate from sitagliptin because it's made using the biological process. If you use the rhodium catalyst, it's costlier. There is a 3-step purification because the enantiomeric excess you get is only 97%. And to get it to 99.5%, you have to do 2 more purifications where you not only add cost, you also lose yield. And so when you have a better process, which is at near ambient conditions, which gives you 99.6% EE, 98% yield, and you are competing with something which uses a transition metal rare catalyst whose price is fluctuating globally, then you have the answer. So the innovation will bring in the lower cost. Okay. And we are still working with 15-year-old processes and trying to just get the cost arbitrage of the Indian ecosystem. But that's not enough because other countries also now have the same or very similar cost arbitrage, which an advantage India had about 2 decades ago, but I think now it's pretty flat. So I think we need to now go into the next level of technology, which is for the next 20 years going to be more viable, more sustainable.
Excellent points. And, if you look at geopolitical events, which might actually stop importing, we have neighbors who might not want to work with us in the future. And then how do we handle with that? So I think your point of internally innovating and innovating in a different direction than what was being used in the past, I think is right on the money. Thank you very much. I will come back to you with the second question later on. So good morning, Radha. Do you want me to repeat the question or you're all set?
Yeah, I'm good. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to FABA for this opportunity to be with you all today. I fully agree with Vinay and with Ashwini on many of the points that they've made. I think Ashwini's point that key starting materials, and for that matter, you look at drugs, APIs as well, we are reliant on China. 70% of our APIs and cases in China. So I agree that we need to really address that part of the supply chain. And Vinay's point about, what are our goals, fixing the goals. I believe that those are extremely relevant and important. I'll build on those, on especially the goals part of it. So when you look at biopharma today, it's 43% of sales comes from vaccines, and then 13% comes from therapeutic products, and 16% comes from diagnostics. So this is how we are really split up. And so vaccine takes a big chunk of it. We've seen much more innovation in vaccines, much less in therapeutic products and in diagnostics. And when we look at, how when you ask this question, what will it take for India to be self-reliant? I think we have to move our gaze from our immediate short-term requirements to what we think will be the requirements in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's kind of like taking a look through a crystal ball, but it's not as opaque as that as well. So for example, if you look at WHO's predictions, they are saying that the next pandemic would be fueled by arboviruses, like, so we could have epidemics due to dengue and Zika. Right now, about, I think something like 390 million people are vulnerable to dengue today, because it's in over 100 countries and there are no good drugs for it. In fact, there is no vaccine for it, and even our diagnostics are okay, but not great. So there are huge opportunities like this that we can look to, that we need to focus on, because those are going to be India's needs. But as soon as you talk about innovation in these, innovation that calls for very sort of ground up R&D, drug discovery or biopharma discovery, then all of the questions that come up relate to, how are we going to fund this, or what will be, are we capable of doing this? Now, the capability question, I think, can be laid to rest. We've shown that repeatedly with vaccine development, that we can do it. So I believe now the question is really not whether we can do it, but how we do it. And then in a capitalist economy, biopharma is going to be guided, or biopharma is making its decisions based on where it can make money. And where it can make money is not necessarily where the need lies. So what innovation we really need is, how can we nudge, and how can biopharma innovate on business models? How can biopharma innovate on how it can make drugs or therapeutics, vaccines, etc., for these neglected diseases to be profitable for them? And I believe it's, in a simple sort of simplistic sort of view of this, perspective of this, it's all a volumes business. So if one can run, like with all our vaccines, like Hep B vaccines and so on, it's really a volumes business. But it is something that India will have to look at very seriously if we want to be self-reliant or Atma Nirbhar in the long term. Nobody's going to solve these problems for us. So we have to solve, and we have to pick our priorities. And I believe that our priorities are looking at us in the face. And if we expand our market beyond India to the tens of other countries that are affected by these kinds of infectious diseases, I believe that there is a case to be made even on the business side. The second thing I want to emphasize is that, yes, it is very capital intensive to develop new products, right? I mean, that kind of cutting edge innovation, if you have a pie, maybe you want to set aside 30% of your budget towards high risk, high reward innovation. But what about the rest? Are there low hanging fruit? And I believe there are low hanging fruit. And what are those? Those are really the diagnostics that we need in this country. 70% of India's rural population does not have access to diagnostic services, which means that until there is a crisis or huge complications show up, people don't get treated for basic things. So I believe that diagnostics is a very solid space in which the industry can truly innovate at low cost as well as with reasonable margins to make it profitable. And the third thing I'll say is that this is related to the innovation process. I looked at clinicaltrials.gov yesterday to see what percentage of clinical studies are actually happening in India. Can you guess? It's 1.2%. 1.2% of studies registered on clinicaltrials.gov are happening in India, which means that we are not able, and without clinical trials, without doing human clinical studies, you cannot innovate. You cannot do that kind of innovation that is needed to really have breakthrough therapies. And what it means is that there are barriers, and that is why it's not happening. And we need to, this is one of our key strengths, that we have access to a population if we do clinical trials right. And I'm fully in favor of a highly regulated system which takes consenting into account very seriously. But my point is that we need to really develop the clinical trial space, to do more studies in India, to derive more data, which is India focused, which is relevant to the Indian population, and then look for solutions, diagnostics, etc., which are also better tailored. So, these are my three, points on the whole Atma Nirbhar story for India.
Yep. Thank you very much, Radha. Very insightful and very brilliantly said. I especially like the idea about resetting our business objectives and expanding to lower hanging fruits, as well as exporting to countries that don't even have what we could send. I think those are all very great ideas. I want to talk to you about the crystal ball comment you made. Whose responsibility is it? Do you think, you and I have worked for probably one of the best companies in India. And so whose responsibility is it? Is it the government's responsibility, or the visionary leaders who run the industry, or a combination? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is a tough one, right, Uday, because companies want to have, they want the freedom to pick the directions they work in. And if we leave everything to market forces, then we know what happens. Today, 90% plus of capital goes into developing drugs for cancer, and infectious diseases get a very small chunk of this, but if you look at the need, majority of the population really suffering if you look at the global population. So there is, if you leave things to market forces alone, this will not correct. So the government needs to play a role in shaping the agenda, but they can be done in ways which are not draconian. Like for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, there is a new incentive called PLI, production linked incentives, where they have picked 53 APIs, which they believe that India should become Atma Nirbhar about. And so they have given contracts to X number of companies to produce these APIs, and there are incentives attached to it. And I believe the government is also thinking about increasing taxes on raw materials that are required, not on raw materials, but on those APIs, so that import is discouraged. So these are ways in which the government is subtly and not so subtly pushing the industry to work in a particular direction. And that's what needs to happen. So the crystal ball has to be looked at by government, by multiple stakeholders. If the government looks at it and the industry looks at it, and there is a way to unite them, and that is what we need, to unite the vision, like we did for COVID. And then I think we have a winning proposition.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Radha. I will come back to you with the second question. I'm going to now move on to Satakarni, my fellow pharma industry friend. So Satakarni, obviously I don't need to repeat the question, but what are your views on how the country, is there like one or two things you think the country can do to be self-sustaining for the next 50 years? We're not just talking short gaps, so short terms.
Hey everyone, good morning. So again, thanks for having me, Uday and Aurobindo Pharma on the panel. I've been hearing to comments by the fellow panelists. I think it is in the right direction. So notwithstanding the little successes we have seen during the COVID on how the Indian industry has responded, especially in the area of diagnostic kits and vaccines. What cannot be missed is essentially the innovation engine in India has taken a huge setback over the last 20-25 years compared to China, compared to the Western world. I think we had a very similar discussion a month or 2 months ago in BioAsia. The first thing that I think that needs to be addressed is, from an industry point of view, is one, the risk appetite of industry towards innovation must go up. That's a very important thing. And having said that, being a CEO of a biopharma company, I always tell myself that my risk appetite in looking at how I develop a product and when should I expect my returns, my risk appetite has to go up as well. And having worked both abroad and in India, you change as per the context, and the Indian context is not very exciting compared to what I see in China and the West. I think I quoted an example some time back where in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the financing model is extremely vibrant for startups, which is into early stage R&D, can still raise huge funds, which doesn't happen in India. So some of these biopharma innovation, especially in the area of complex biologicals, or even, I mean, forget complex biologicals, India is at least a decade or two away from complex biologicals, even in the area of biosimilars or complex formulations. You require deep pockets, extremely deep pockets, to put a product through its course and get an approval. For example, I heard Radha talk about clinical trials, and such an extremely valid point it is. This is where I bring the second point into discussion, and I'll lay out the context, is about the regulatory landscape, right? Now, if you want to put together a biologic, a biosimilar into India, you can get away without doing a proper phase 1. Sometimes you do 100, 150 patient trial. Lack of evidence is not evidence of biosimilarity, and still the products gets approved in India. There are a number of such products with very minimal clinical data, with lack of evidence of safety and immunogenicity sometimes, which get approved. There is a regulation for it, and the regulators do a good job of the regulations that they have in hand. But then the same clinical trial data and the dossier doesn't meet the expectations of more evolved regulatory agencies like the EMEA or even the FDA. You cannot take a dossier which is approved in India as it is and submit to EMA and FDA and even get a process or a meeting with them. So as long as we set our benchmark from a regulatory landscape, which is my second point, the first one is risk appetite, the second one is the regulatory landscape. As long as our regulatory benchmarks are too low, right, the innovation is being stifled, right? For example, there can be an intelligent debate about what clinical trials you require. For example, there are certain drugs, for example, there are certain colony stimulating factors where you don't need to do an efficacy trial. And that's where innovation comes in. You don't need to do a large clinical efficacy trial, and you can still prove efficacy through a pharmacodynamic study, which is coupled with a pharmacokinetic study, right? But if you look at the Indian guidelines, it still says that you need an efficacy trial, where the Western agencies are moving ahead and saying that, okay, there are certain drugs which we have understood over 15, 20 years. Can we cut down on the clinical trial costs by just saying that the PK and PD relevance is enough to say that this drug is a biosimilar, and we don't need an efficacy? So that's innovation. That's innovation from a regulatory standpoint, right? So that needs to also happen in India, right? So instead of having very stifling regulations sometimes, and these regulations are stifling in a way from a procedural standpoint and not from a depth standpoint. And being in the industry, I'm not afraid to talk about it because I need to see things changing in the country, right? So innovation, the debate of innovation should happen not just at the R&D level, but also from the marketing level, what a patient requires, and also from a regulatory standpoint, saying that what sort of drugs do we need to put into our patients? I'll tell you a very interesting example from my previous job without quoting the company. when I came back to India, I saw there is hardly any plasma fractionated products in India, and it doesn't require a lot of innovation. Right? India is a population of 120 billion or 120 crore people, 1.2 billion people, and then you don't have enough albumin to serve Indian patients. You don't have enough IVIG to serve Indian patients. You don't have hemophilia care is non-existent, was non-existent at least in 2012-13. So when I was doing my MBA at Lausanne, in IMD Business School at Lausanne in Switzerland, one of my topics was about what do we do to spur plasma fractionation in a country like India with huge population so that these products become accessible to Indian patients, right? Then I looked at the regulations that are required to source plasma from blood banks, right? Now, whether the basic questions exist about whether this is a for-profit business or a not-for-profit business. Mm-hmm. Who is actually making a profit here? Whether it is profit being made by the businesses, and the nature of the businesses is that you are in a business to make a profit. Whether you sell soap in a kirana dukan or you sell a pharma drug to a patient suffering from a debilitating disease, the whole aspect is you bring in money, you feed in money back into the pipeline, and let the business create valuation. Now, who makes profit there essentially is probably a blood bank, because in the Indian scenario, you are collecting plasma as mostly like a voluntary donation, right? You are separating out the blood components, and then you have plasma, which is sitting there, which is being sold at 1,500 to 2,000 rupees. So essentially, this is where the government policy making becomes extremely important. I think one of the panelists talked about the production-linked incentive, which is extremely good the Indian government is doing, right, to address the API shortage and the dependency that we have on API supplies primarily from China, because China advanced. I think Ashwini talked about it. Fermentation-based APIs, India has taken a beating. The spirit of 1980s, when Hindustan Antibiotics and a few other companies were making fermentation-based APIs, sadly is lost today. And we have yielded the ground completely to China. Now, what government has done now in the PLI-2 scheme is, can these companies make fermentation-based APIs in India, right? So the same thing should happen across the industry, whether it is diagnostics, whether it is medical devices. I see a few important things happening in medical devices now. We have a medical devices park in Hyderabad now. So there is a cluster concept, right? You talk about clusters, which spurs innovation. The great example is Indian Drugs and Pharmaceuticals Limited, which promoted a cluster concept in Hyderabad, which is probably a reason why the Hyderabad industry has prospered. Now I can see medical devices parks in Hyderabad coming up, but this is too little. Hyderabad is probably having a medical devices park and maybe a couple of other cities, but the government should also promote more clusters than is required. So that's the third point. The first one is risk appetite on R&D. The second one is change the regulatory landscape, compete with the best, and spur your industry, spur your academia to make products that can compete with the best and that can withstand the scrutiny and rigor expected of the FDAs and EMAs, and suddenly you will find Indian industry gearing up and meeting those expectations. And the third thing is promote clusters, right? Promote clusters like in medical devices that is happening now, like in pharma clusters that is happening now. And the fourth thing is the production-linked incentive, which is where the policy making comes in. Such things should happen across the industry segments. So such things should happen in plasma fractionation, such things can happen in biopharma, etc. So I stop here before I take up too much of time. And the fifth important thing after these 4 points is also address the gap in resources. While a lot of Indian skill set is moving abroad, let me tell you from my own personal experience, I have a couple of academics here, people from academia here. When I hire people with a postdoctoral experience or a PhD experience from abroad versus those that I hire from India, not talking about the tier 1 and tier 1 institutes like the CCMB, IISc, TAFRs, etc., I can tell you there is a huge difference in how they are prepared for the industry. Right? So that needs to be addressed as well. The exposure in tier 2 universities, I'm not talking about the leading institutes there, the tier 2 universities, there's a huge gap in how we prepare our students for the industry and even for academia, right? And let me tell you, some of them could not even put together a credible report. The scientific writing skills are so poor, right? So from an academia, also there needs to be a shake-up in how we prepare our students to compete with the best across. And I'm telling you, probably you know it better as professors, The cream always leaves India. 70% of the cream leaves India, goes to university in the US or Europe, and probably comes back after 10 or 15 years. But it is important that we ingrain the right scientific appetite and rigor and the ability to be inquisitive in what they do from academia teachings as well. So that is gap in resources that I see from academia and industry, and that needs to be bridged somehow. So these are the 5 points that I can think of, and I stop here.
Yep, excellently put, Satakarni, especially your perspectives on gap in resources, something that's been haunting the country for a long time. I hope that gets addressed. And I mean, there are multiple projects that are being floated around to meet that gap. And, you know, FABA, as you know, is one of the few organizations that's really pushing the envelope and trying to help students meet the gap. But very well said. I will come back to you with additional questions later on. Let me move on to the second question, please. And we will follow the same sequence of asking the question. So this question will go out to Vinay then first. Vinay, how can the young Indian scientists, many of whom who are actually probably listening to you today, contribute to the country being self-reliant? What can they do, you think, in your opinion, for in helping the country to be self-reliant? Or simply, do they remain students and don't worry about that at all? Or are there things they can do?
Before I go to that, I want to just, Satakarni's one comment on the regulatory mechanism. I kind of completely agree with the regulatory mechanism being one of the limitations, or rather, we tend to, you know, if something is approved by FDA, then it is much easier to get it approved within India. And if we have to do some approval from ground up, where a company, something has been innovated within India, we look at it with a lot of suspicions. That's true in the regulatory framework, and that needs to be addressed. And we need to have a very clearly defined policy and a roadmap for encouraging way of doing regulatory approvals rather than making it difficult. And that also addresses the question which Radha was talking about in terms of clinical trials. We don't have clinical trials because we want somebody else to say that this is good enough to go to clinical trials. We are not really going to start from saying, okay, we believe in this, and so let's go for clinical trials. This is more of a mindset. I don't know how to address this per se, but, you know, hopefully this is one thing that some of us can, who are sitting in various places, can actually put forward our ideas that regulatory setup has to change a bit. Evolve. I wouldn't say change, but it needs to evolve considering the current reality. Now, coming to the question of what is it for the young students, you know, when I came back as a fresh faculty way back in 2004, there were, I mean, the pharma sector was pretty much limited. I think I mentioned this last time also. Right. One would talk about Reddy's, and one would talk about, Ranbaxy at that time. And you realistically, the options for students or options to even go and set up your own shop was pretty much limited. And that has drastically changed, especially in the last 5 to 8 years. Biotech has invested a lot in terms of, you know, opening up many incubators across in various places, various cities. I mean, a place like Hyderabad has, I think, something like 5 to 10 incubators across, and quite a lot of them are well, I mean, in different sectors, some in biosector, some in chemistry, but incubators are clearly there. And if somebody, I mean, a student has an idea, or any research person, it's not necessarily a student, a faculty has an idea, their ability to go and get to these incubators to test their idea is much better. And these incubators are also well equipped. And I mean, they also provide you connects with the existing industry within the cities. In the bigger cities is relatively better. I think Hyderabad is amazing on this. There is a terrific ecosystem for a young person who has a little bit of, you know, they have more risk appetite, as Satakarni, you're talking about it, right? More than the companies, youngsters have more risk appetite because they realistically are willing to do anything that is necessary to, you know, test out their idea. They work hard and they're invested in it completely. And I believe that per se is an encouraging aspect. And that's one thing. they're willing to try, which is important. And incubation centers is a way to go. And I know of people, I mean, students of CCMB who are now talking about starting their own startup, and they start with an incubation and take it further, and eventually some of them succeed, but they're willing to take that risk. I appreciate that. And I think it's a lot to do with Hyderabad. I would say that much for sure. It's a lot to do with the way this particular city has specifically gives that particular drive and the environment for people to try it out. So the other part is that, the collaborations, how would a student get any idea to start working or, try out? Industry is something that is an option kind of a thing. It's very difficult for me to talk about what Satakarni said in terms of tier 2 academic thing. There are other issues that are kind of problematic and contribute to what you are saying. But at least in the context of places which are like CCMB kind of a thing, it's important to start working, for the faculty to start working. I'm not talking about students, and students then obviously get the necessary exposure to work with the industry. So if there is a program that is established between the institutes and industry, and in this program, it allows some kind of a joint PhD program, and this is something I may have mentioned earlier too, something equivalent to that, then what happens is you are exposed to both worlds at a little earlier stage in your career. And that allows you to make your right choices, and you know what you're getting into. You're not getting into, I know this comes to training, and training cannot happen if we sit in our silos and say, okay, academic operates one way, I will do my publication, and then industry operates saying, I need my money and product. So these two somewhere need to talk. Innovation is also connected to this. So what is an interesting problem? And is there any way some of the leading labs of an academic labs can help in forging that innovation? Or, if you have an idea, can you really start saying, okay, look, this idea is not anywhere near a product. Can we work together to make it something tangible, possible to take it to a product level? So this collaboration is seriously missing, only started coming up. And if we really want to be there in next 20 years, 25 years, this collaboration has to really become better, and only then we really can take it forward. That's all I have to say. Excellent.
So I really appreciate the comments you made about the incubation system and how students can exploit that. That didn't have, certainly when I was a student, that was not an option. So I think the students, if you're listening and listening carefully, you must utilize, as Vinay has said, I think the incubation systems, especially in Hyderabad and some of the other cities, are brilliant. Just go do an internship. You'll get a flavor for what innovation is all about. You don't need to commit yourself for more than 3 to 6 months. So very well said. Ashwini, I have the same question for you, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Uday, Vinay, Satakarni, Radha. So I'll just try to assimilate some of the points. I don't think I have anything brand new to add. But what I will say is what Satakarni rightly said, the capability in bioprocesses and fermentation that India lost during the decades of the 80s and 90s up to about 2000. I think we were leaders in that technology for more than 20 years. And because of certain policies, because of certain economic factors, that advantage was eroded in the last 2 decades. So as a youngster, my advice to the students is, and I'm giving that advice because there is a supporting ecosystem already in place.
Right.
At least in Hyderabad, I can name IKP Knowledge Park, CCMB, IICT, Hyderabad University, IIT Hyderabad. There are at least 6 places a student who wants to start a new project in the area of chemistry, biology, interface can go and get the right mentoring, can write the right support ecosystem, as well as funding from BIRAC. And these problems to be solved are not, mega problems of science. They are more like process innovations in a time frame of between 6 months to 2 years. I think at least one piecemeal at a time can be addressed. And the advantage of taking up this problem, that is solving a local problem in a domestic ecosystem with the mentoring and funding support, which is already in place, is that while on one hand, you may have a postdoc waiting for you from a foreign lab, but I think the long-term satisfaction you will get in terms of contributing will be far more than, say, getting a PNAS or a science paper.
Yeah.
The second thing is, why do it? And I will say do it because right now, the policy framework, the PLI scheme, is already in place. So if you have an innovation which brings in an Indian produced product, I think the atmosphere and the mood is right, that you can make a pitch to the right places, to the right people. And if there is a competition, I think there is a place for an India produced product, whether it is in the area of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, textiles, computers, what have you. The second point, which is more of an, not for the students, but more in terms of upgrading the infrastructure, as Satakarni said, I think we need to multiply. We need to have such ecosystems, the kind that Hyderabad enjoys in many, many other cities, in many, many other states. I think we need to multiply this at least 50-fold in order to see many such startups coming out, which can, I think the problems are already there. The ecosystem is there. The regulatory structure is there. The scientific and technological and R&D support system and mentoring are there. So I think all the right dots are there. They need to be connected.
Yep.
So all the very best to the students who are online today.
Yeah, very well said, Ashwini. Actually, if I wish I were a student today, these are very exciting times to be a student, I think. But, that's the way it is. So
they have options other than postdocs, I think, to create, to, as they say, build their own road, which many of us who are sitting on the other side of the panel didn't have. So I think they should take full advantage of it.
Totally, yeah. Radha, please.
Thanks, Uday. So I echo many of the things Vinay and Ashwini said. I'll add a couple of things. One is that I think students should start to develop an entrepreneurship mindset. And that is not to say that everybody has to go start a company, but even within, working in a large company, mid-sized company, whatever it may be, an entrepreneurship mindset means that you're focused on problem solving. And that is, I think, a very important component of training that is not, it's not fully addressed in our education system. So I'm a big believer in design thinking. It's a very structured process of teaching students how to grapple with a problem, or how to even find a problem for that matter. Where do you get started? And how do you know that it's a good problem to work on? How do you know that it is possible that how do you know that there is a solution that can be worked on? So it's an incremental process by which you identify a problem, you validate the problem, then you look at different solutions, you do some feasibility, arrive at the one that seems like the most favorable one to go after. So when you inculcate an entrepreneurial mindset, then what changes for you is that you stop looking at problems as problems and you start looking at them as opportunities. And I think that's a fundamental shift in the way we think that has to happen. As a corollary to that, when I came out of graduate school and did my postdoc and so on and so forth, I was very focused that whatever I work on, I took an entrepreneurial journey, and I felt like it had to be a problem that was, that kind of extends from my previous research, and it's, it's linear, it's connected and so on. But I think the world is a different place today. You can solve any number of problems, and the tools that you need to solve these problems are also possible to learn. Therefore, I tell students not to feel that they need to work in one particular space, but to look at the entire world's problems as questions or issues that they can possibly address. Saw this great video about these two entrepreneurs who came out of IIT Delhi. They started an app called Animal, and it's an app that allows rural India to trade in cattle. And their experience was that they grew up in rural Haryana and rural Rajasthan, and kudos to them. They went into IIT Delhi. What did they do? They said, hey, there's a big problem there. And you know what everybody said to them? Who the hell is going to download your app? And they have I don't know, a few million downloads now. And the point they've proven is that Bharat is downloading and using apps. And if you solve the relevant problem, then, the sky's the limit. So my point is that one doesn't need to feel stifled. The PhD and the postdoc process should be seen as a preparatory ground for working on new ideas. And the training should be seen as a way to get the mind to focus, come up with solutions, and follow a very, very deep process to solve it. So this is one part of it. The second part of it is that a deeply curiosity-driven mindset is very important. One has to constantly be looking to see what is the next problem to solve. And that curiosity may not have been something that was learned in school, or in college for that matter. But that is a really, really important attitude that one has to develop. It's something that I find missing in a lot of places. For example, you're quite happy with the way things are going and you don't want to rock the boat anymore. Well, that's not a curiosity mindset. Right. Curiosity mindset is to say, where are the gaps and what can we do differently and how can we do this better? And this is what in the company that where I'm CTO, this is what we constantly have to ask each other. And the third thing is that there needs to be a willingness to be highly interdisciplinary in today's world. Mm-hmm. So if you're a biologist and you've trained in molecular biology, you need to learn some basic coding. You need to know what artificial intelligence means. You need to learn how to at least understand genomic data at a high level. But learn some of these tools, even though they may not directly apply to your current project. Having that skill set is very important. And I cannot emphasize how much we're learning from analyzing data, which is then feeding the innovation cycle. And the more you can do that, and in order to do that, you need the skill set to do it. So learn those skills so that you are really prepared for the biopharma of tomorrow rather than the biopharma of today. So those are my three.
Yep, very, very well said, Radha. I think everything that Vinay, Ashwini, and you have said, I hope the students, you should write these things down. I'm a big believer of having, even at the age of 20, you have to have 5-year plan. This go with the flow thing in today's day and age is going to kill you, actually. You're going to be so non-competitive that you're going to be just washed out. So go with the flow is not going to work. As Radha said, take the opportunities, change your mindset. Very well said, Radha. I know you have a hard stop at 9:30 and you need to leave. Is that right, Radha?
Actually, I changed I rearranged something.
Oh, thank you. Because I'm sure the students would like to ask questions to you. Thank you. Satakarni, please, if you can answer the same question.
I think some great points by Vinay, Ashwini, and Radha. To the students, what can I say? I mean, I can only talk from my experiences and what I have seen. First thing, when you are students in your PhD programs or postgrad programs, is that focus on the originality aspect of your work. That's the most critical aspect of it. Most of the times what happens when we are researching is that we look for works which are extremely similar to probably the topic that we think that is relevant to us, and we try to repeat some of that work. But what you should focus as you move from your first year PhD to the second year PhD to the third year PhD is that the originality aspect of your work should enhance. And when you start thinking originally, that helps in your career quite a bit when you pass out of your grad school. The second thing is, I think I echo with what Radha has mentioned about curiosity. I would play it out slightly differently for the students. The same point, inquisitiveness, that's the most important thing when you are in scientific research. Stay with your inquisitiveness, keep asking the questions to yourself because you know your PhD you know your research work more than your professor at the end of your third year or fourth year. So the childlike enthusiasm and the inquisitiveness should stay with you through and through. And the third thing, which probably is for the students and for the academia, is that what I've seen in some good universities outside of India and maybe one or two in India, is that during your PhD, the students are exposed to something called a graduate personal development program. I personally went through that program at Manchester during my PhD, which was run by PwC those days. It exposes you to how to commercialize your research, how to protect the IP, how to incubate. So some of these topics for a 21, 22-year-old who is doing a PhD is extremely important. Gone are those days when you sit in your lab, toil, and say something comes out of it and you are measured by a Nature publication or a PNAS publication, etc. You should know the various facets of your research. What is the end point of the work that you are doing, whether it is PhD or whether it is in your career, and try and accumulate the horizontal breadth of it. That's extremely critical. Some of us who are core scientists and engineers today are business leaders, probably because of our continuous craving to understand the horizontal breadth of our business or what we are in. It's still work in progress. I keep learning quite a bit. I'm probably on a scale of 10, I am at 2, and I have 8 more things to learn. So what is important is never stop evolving on the other aspects of what your science connects to. It connects finally to the patient. That's a deliverable. Now, what it takes to get you there is something you should start asking yourselves right from being a student. And the fourth thing, which is extremely important to this generation, while I am probably a generation before you, is there is no shortcuts to success. One thing which I see in Indian industry, in the mindset of Indians, is that we put in 10 rupees today, we need 15 rupees tomorrow. We wanted to achieve that, right? And that's the reason why probably we have done extremely well in the generics industry. But biopharma innovation requires deep science, requires restraint, both from business leaders, from scientists and everyone. And importantly, an understanding of the situation that your returns are not going to come tomorrow. So for any startup entrepreneurs who probably want to put out your research there and commercialize things, please understand you need to be patient. You need to really believe in your product. And as Radha mentioned, you need to know that you are chasing a problem and you are trying to solve a problem, right? And it takes time. It cannot be an example. It cannot be an e-commerce industry where there is an Amazon and Flipkart does a very similar thing to Amazon and succeeds because there is a space. That's also great. That requires a lot of training. But biopharma innovation is much deeper than what we see. And please be patient. So essentially, these are my 4 points. The originality aspect should never die away. Stay inquisitive through and through. Develop horizontal breadth right from a very young age as a grad student. And fourth thing, there is no shortcut in science, because at the end of the day, your science impacts a patient and it impacts his relatives, it impacts the society. So it's very important what you do has a certain ethical bearing and an ethical standing to it. So that's the important.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think students, we're going to start the Q&A now, but just to summarize this question, I think both Vinay and Ashwini have brilliantly said how there is an infrastructure, an ecosystem now where students can expose themselves to innovation. So please make, especially in Hyderabad, please make use of that. And Radha and Satakarni is talking about an entrepreneurial mindset. Change the way you look at problems, convert them into potential opportunities. Very good point. So the floor is now open for questions from, we'll take the questions from students first, and then we'll open up to everybody else. So Nidhi, or are there any questions that the students have? Or
not yet, Dr. Uday, not yet in the chat box. But if anybody is willing to unmute and ask, please go ahead.
Yeah, please do. You're not going to get an opportunity to interact with these opinion leaders anytime soon. So please go ahead. Don't be shy. One of the things about Indian students, and I was part of that too, is we are very shy. We cannot be shy. there is a saying that the squeaky wheel only gets the grease, right? So you have to do a little bit of squeaking to get attention. That's a very important skill that you have to develop, is how do you interact with others? How do you articulate? And how you ask questions is a starting point of that training. So please don't be shy. Please go ahead and ask questions. So.
Good morning, sir. I have a question.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself, please? Yeah, thank you.
Sure, sir. Myself, Suman. I'm doctoral research scholar at the Department of Animal Biology, School of Life Sciences at the University of Hyderabad. And I want to ask, I'm a first year PhD student. So how should I proceed if I want to collaborate initially in my research with an industry, and who should be my first point of contact within the industry after my supervisor?
So Vinay, you want to address that, and maybe Radha?
It's okay. First thing is, if you are a first year PhD students, I think you need to, whatever research work you are doing, I think you should improve the skill set part of it, because it takes around 2 to 3 years realistically to start having a proper skill set. And one way to contact industry is what I think Uday has mentioned somewhere along the way, is actually to have some kind of look at the intern opportunities. It's not something that, I want to now get in the, so if in the meantime, the way forward would be to look at some level of intern opportunities at the existing industries. That way you will get an exposure to the other end. That's what I would do it if I were to be looking at it. But most important is to have a skill set that becomes important or that gets enhanced. But acquire the skill set. 1 year is too soon to acquire that skill set, and acquire skill set in such a way that you are good at what you do, really good at what you do. And the other aspect is look for the right kind of internships. That I think something Uday had mentioned as an entry point to industry.
Yep, absolutely. Radha, any comments on how we could help Suman?
Yeah, I think seeking internships, so work backwards and say, what kind of internships and what kind of skills does industry look for? So you can, focus on acquiring those skills, but also that on the University of Hyderabad campus, in Hyderabad in particular, that given that there are so many incubators, that would be my first vote of call. Look at the incubators, because small startups are more likely to be friendly towards students, especially students who are on the same campus as them. When we were incubated, when VITAS was incubated at the University of Hyderabad, we had students come in from the School of Life Sciences, and they did short projects if that was possible for them. So it all depends on how you're willing to spin this. Talk to startups, see if there's a way for you to do an internship or to work after classes are over, and this way you begin to understand what you like and what you don't like, and you start to build that internal barometer. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
Just walk over to the Bioness labs. You have, I think, 50 there.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. This is very much reachable for me.
Suman, you climb one floor. Then you will come across all.
No, but on a more serious note,
would like to interact.
Yeah, that's right. On a more serious note, if your problem, firstly, when does a collaboration start? A collaboration starts when you are reaching the envelope of your own discipline, and you don't have the right skill sets or the answers or the data knowledge to answer some of the questions which you are asking from the perspective where you are sitting. So I think first year is early, but it's a very good time to start. So if you want a chemistry interface, you have chemistry. If you want engineering, you have engineering. If you want medical sciences, you have medical sciences. If you want biology, it's your own building. And if you want industry also, that's there. So I think really sky is the open limit for you. And of course, you can start with Bioness today itself.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you, sir. For all of you for your insights.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome. All right. Who's the next?
Yes. So, hi, Nidhi. So, Sai Nikit is asking this question. I'm Nikit, a PhD scholar from University of Hyderabad. I saw in many government applications, there is a column called number of published papers, but not number of impactful papers. I feel that it is driving research scholars to publish more papers, but not more innovative papers. So he's requesting your comment on this.
So we'll have Ashwini give an academic perspective and Satakarni from an industry perspective of what he thinks of publication.
It's the right question. What's your name?
Sai Nikit.
Yeah, it's the right question, but I can only answer it in a general way. Any system of evaluation is a metric-based system. It's not a perfect system, but for lack of something better, we tend to use it, and marks in the exam or grades is one of them. I'm not saying that the person who gets 88 marks is better than someone who gets 72, but that's what we use. I fully agree with you. It should be a balance between quantity and quality, but I think there are metrics which kind of take a combination of both the impact factor of the journal and the number of journals in which you have published. So it takes some kind of a cumulative index, which takes into account the numericals of both the number of papers, the impact factor of the journal, the perception of the journal, and so on and so forth. But no quantitative metric can be all inclusive, but at the same time, it's an indicative number. Yep. I can't say anything more than that.
Very well said, very well presented. Satakarni, you have, how do you, I have my way of evaluating students when they come into the company, but I'd like to hear your perspective, especially as relating to publications. Are you enticed by seeing a science or a nature publication, or?
It's a difficult one to answer. I think Ashwini had nailed it from an academic requirement per se. It happens even outside of India. So you need to have a couple of papers, maybe 2 or 3, to make sure that you meet your PhD requirement. Now, the quality of the work gets you to the journals that you are talking about, maybe Nature or PNAS, etc. But from a pure industry standpoint, to be very honest, if there is a Nature publication, I would see it. I would see for the originality of the work. But you should understand that when students come out of these laboratories with a great publication, it's often a culmination of work from the professor, from the student, from the co-labs, etc. So what I look at industry when we hire people, he's definitely not the publication. We look at how they present their work. We look at whether they're original in their thought process. And you'll be very surprised that we have an aptitude test as well, and most of the PhD students fail their aptitude test. We essentially look for people who can really communicate the work they have done, whether it is a Nature publication or whether it is another publication or just a piece with a couple of papers in progress. How do they communicate their work? They really understand the technique behind it. Why did they address the problem in the first place? What is the problem? What is that they're trying to solve? And the second thing is, what are the techniques that they have understood and dealt with that would be relevant to the industry in the job that they are seeking for? So that's very important. I'm not a great fan of publications. Sure, they have some weightage, but no.
Yeah, Vinay, please go ahead, Vinay.
Yeah, I believe one of the most undervalued things actually is how well you articulate your science.
Totally.
What you have done. If you're given 5 minutes, you should be able to come up with something clearly. This is what I have done, and this is the major outcome of what I have done in that time. If you're given 3 minutes, you should be able to do it. It's not time dependent, it's clarity dependent. It's how clear you are, and it is not even language dependent.
Yeah,
it's like you may not be the best, you may not be able to very fluent in English. That should not stop you from putting across your points with clarity. If you have clarity, it's given that other people start appreciating. Now, with respect to government applications having impact factors and looking at quality, quantity, these are only entry-level things. And then those applications are screened by somebody and people put their own set of criteria afterwards. So that's all I have to say with respect to those applications.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. Yes, a quick comment, Satakarni.
I just have a quick comment to what Vinay said. Very, very relevant, because during my PhD first year, when we went through this GPDP program, one thing that we were exposed to is do an elevator pitch. I mean, then we do a lot of elevator pitch during our MBS and all, but during PhD, an elevator pitch is about a 2-3 minute pitch, where we were asked as first year students to explain our research topic, right? And it's a struggle to bring everything together into 2-3 minute elevator pitch and convince them that, okay, what I do is essentially trying to solve this problem. I think students should inculcate what Vinay has said, that thoroughness and ideation is extremely important.
Yeah. Any more, Nidhi, please?
Yeah.
Can we have the student questions answered first, and then you know, the adults can take a shot at it. So.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'll take this opportunity to add something and ask a question to the panelists as well. So yes, when we talk about, you know, elevator pitch, even when I was doing a postdoc at the University of Michigan, so I went through this, they have rigorous professional development modules. And that is where I was exposed to, you know, coming up with this elevator pitch to communicate, to strike a conversation with anybody. And so coming back to, you know, the panel talked about inculcating industrial mindset, preparing the students for industry, exposing them to industry through internships. And so, you know, to kind of bring all this together, do you think that some industry training program should be undertaken by the university or institutes where they focus on professional development of the students and prepare them to transition to industry, like at an official level? It could be a curriculum, a short curriculum, a few sessions by the experts. Would that help the entire life sciences community in Indian scenario?
Yeah, there's, I mean, the very short answer, Nidhi, is absolutely yes. There is no question that that's going to help a lot. I think, but the core of it all is, you know, the articulation is very critical. I mean, all of us have hired hundreds of people, and it really boils down to how well are you able to present yourself, and not the language, you know. I mean, we're not talking about language. The clarity of thought has to come through in that 5 minutes. You may have 100 papers, but if you're not able to have the clarity of thought, I doubt if any of us would hire such an individual. So you're right on the money, Nidhi. Everything you said is important, and hopefully FABA is actually helping with a fair bit of that, as you know, and you're a key part of that. So yeah. Any other questions, Nidhi?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we do have a question from Dr. Pavitra. How to get good financial support in case of innovations pertaining to disease of less prevalence or neglected disease, where the output of such innovations may not be of huge demand?
Good question. I think Radha had alluded to working on the low-hanging fruit. So maybe Radha, you could take this one, please.
Sure. So, you know, the usual places to go to for funding nowadays is you know, BIRAC and, you know, some international grant opportunities as well that are not specific to companies in specific, you know, particular countries like Carbex. So there are specific monies allocated, or there are funds which can be tapped into for initial product development, for initial R&D, for getting to a proof of concept and so on. But I'll say that beyond having beyond those milestones, the business models that exist today are really broken. So I won't sort of sugarcoat this. The reality is that working on diseases of low prevalence is not easy at all. Because at the end of the day, you have one of two business models. One model is that you license the IP to a big pharma company that is then willing to commercialize and take it to market. Big pharma, small pharma, medium pharma, everybody wants to see how much money they're going to make. And there's a bit of a lack of imagination in the way that these business models have evolved. So there is a huge resistance to looking at diseases of low and middle income countries, LMICs, where the pricing is based, or the revenue model has to be volume based, and that has not quite evolved in the same way as other business models where it's unit based pricing, which is very attractive. So I'll say that we still don't have that. This is work in progress. There are many organizations that are saying that are bringing focus to infectious diseases and diseases of low prevalence. Outside of the infectious diseases space, for example, orphan diseases have special regulatory considerations, particularly in the US, and you can get specific funding for that kind of work. And there are also specific trusts or foundations that support research in areas like cystic fibrosis, for example. So it's a patchwork of funding sources. You've got to be very imaginative. You've got to be very, very proactive. You've got to be constantly looking. It's possible, but it's not easy.
Thank you, Radha. Vinay, please go ahead. I know you have a hard stop at 10. Actually, we all have to stop at 10, so we have 5 more minutes. Yeah, please go ahead, Vinay.
Yeah, there is, while it is competitive, there is an opportunity for somebody to get funded by BIRAC. So if you can actually write a proper project with whatever the idea that you have, and it has to be written properly, and it has to be sold properly. Most important, it has to be presented properly, because these projects tend to be competitive. But these opportunities are there, and you can get up to 50 lakhs actually.
Yes.
As a seed money for incubating your idea that you have. So getting that financial support is possible. Government of India, coming through BIRAC actually supports it. And Radha was talking about the other opportunities. What I'm suggesting is, but however, all these things depend on how well you actually ride those projects and how well you actually sell that, in one sense, kind of share that idea and thought process with the committee. And they're competitive for sure, but opportunities exist.
Yep. Thank you, Vinay. Yes, Nidhi, please.
Yes. Need an opinion on what the better option is, whether pursuing PhD in Western countries and gather skills and come back to India, or pursue PhD in India and work on projects here only.
Yeah, we have all, actually, we didn't have the luxury. If we got a chance to go to US, we just ran before anybody could stop us. But now there's opportunities. Ashwini, would you like to address that, please?
I think it's a personal choice. I don't want to have any prescription on.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Vinay.
I think I believe that both of them have their own set of challenges. That's for sure. So if you are doing your PhD in the top end places within India, I don't see any difference. That's the reality. With respect to going to US, it presents a very different set of challenges. One, you have to adjust to the culture. I'm talking about research culture, even getting adjusted to that part of it. And second thing is that even there, PhD students in majority of the places work not directly under a boss, but sometimes they work under a senior postdoc of the lab and other things. So, ultimately boils down to the training you can get in any place. So I believe that you should look at the option. It is not going there or working here. It is the kind of lab that you work in that matters.
Yep. Totally agree. Radha, did you want to say something or no?
I wanted to say that in India, there are these top-notch institutions where the quality of the training is excellent. And I think that if you get an opportunity to work in one of these institutions, it's great. But there's a very steep fall-off from the top tier to the next level of institutions where the quality of training is really very lacking. Yeah. And so what happened, I think, so the way it seems to me is that if you look at the US and if you look at Europe, then there are a lot of labs which are not necessarily top tier. They are in the next tier, but they're also extremely good. So the training would be amazing, and the number of opportunities therefore is much greater if you look at the sum total. So I think you've got to hedge your bets a little bit and figure out whether you have a chance of getting into the top institutions in India or not. And if not, then, you know, certainly I think there are a lot of other places to look at, which are across the world. And then of course there are visa and other kinds of considerations that you need to take into account.
Yep. Thank you.
Do we have time for this last question?
I'd like to have Jagat, who's a full-time card-carrying Bay Area person, to comment on this, Jagat. What do you think? I mean, you're on mute.
I think these all the panelists did a fantastic job. All the points they mentioned right on the dot, and I really appreciate very thoughtful comments they made it. I think what we see in the Bay Area ecosystem, especially how the industry and academia actually work so well, along with the financial ecosystem, the venture capital ecosystem plays a huge role there, actually. So it's not the government, actually the private investment sector plays a fantastic job here. And coming back to the students, in fact, here, the student community, starting from as early as bachelor's, 4 years, they do internships in the 4 years of bachelor, and master's 2 years. So by the time they complete their master, they would have already worked 5 years in 5 different companies. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the companies are welcoming these people to train them on their expense. Why? Because these are the people, they need them when they want to hire, and they're ready to come and work on day one. So the internship is going to be a huge thing, and industry and academia in India should really work together. And of course, private investment is the bigger one. And as Dr. Satakarni was pointing is, you know, it's not about you have 10 rupees today and tomorrow you'll have 15 rupees. That is the mindset, is not going to work. Obviously, you know, for discovery and innovation requires at least 10 years of waiting period to really want to see that money. Totally. So, you know, all the points are well documented, and I wish and Fab or someone will sit down and make a nice report. I think it will be a fantastic one. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jagat. We are going to do a write-up about this, and very well said. Nidhi, we have really time for half a question. So.
Okay, so Dr. Basappa, if you could be quick.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, but Dr. Basappa, your time is up. So.
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, sir. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Actually, I wonder, sir, so many panelists had discussed a very good and practical idea where a PhD student or a postdoc should happily work in India. So that should be the motto. So that is the good, that is a good perspective. I agree, because I studied in MIT and Hokkaido University as a JSP fellow. So, sir, what I am observing practically over the 15 years of my academic experience at universities, where Tier 2 universities, including professors with 7th pay.
We can't hear you, Professor Basappa. So, yeah, I think we have hit 10:02, and yes. I want to wrap up. A lot of people, panelists, have to leave. They have a hard stop. I want to thank Ashwini, Radha, Satakarni, and also really outstanding. Vinay had to leave, but thank you so much for your time. I know all of you are really busy, and you made time to be here with us and share your wonderful thoughts and ideas, key opinion leaders. So thank you very much. Can't thank you enough, really, but thank you.
Thanks, Uday, Professor Radha, Nidhi, Faba panel, all the panelists. Thank you.
Yes, sure.
Thank you, Uday. Fantastic job. And all the panelists also. They have really done their job very well.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
bye-bye.